on my mind.
Hello and welcome back to The Boxing Show with me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, I am joined this week by an esteemed panel of guests, including the new WBO Cruiserweight Champion of the World, Mr. Chris Billam-Smith, and as always, our regular Mr. Andy Clarke. No Barry Jones today, so we thought that we'd scour down the list of WBO champions, and we started with the most recent one, which is why it's not the most recent one after this past weekend, but Teofimo Lopez was unable to get in on such short notice. Chris, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. The bigger, better version of WBO champion, eh? I'll leave out the bad jokes as well, but no, thank you for having me on.
Well, you're very welcome, and we will talk a little bit about your spectacular win over Lawrence Okolie a few weeks ago in Bournemouth. But before that, let's come to Mr. Andy Clarke. Andy, always a pleasure. Enjoy the weekend of boxing?
I did. I spent a little bit of time around a Matchroom show last week. I was down at the weigh-in, and I enjoyed watching the show on Saturday night. Then I enjoyed getting up early to watch Taylor Lopez. I haven't really got it in me to stay up anymore. I used to be brilliant at staying up and terrible at getting up, and now I'm just pretty terrible at both. But I made it, and yeah, it was just another really good weekend of fights, and another week where we basically all got one of our predictions wrong. And as I often say, getting predictions wrong is good. It's good for the game because it shows that you don't really know. It keeps you on your toes, and brilliant to see someone like Lopez back. I wanted Taylor to win, but good to see someone like him back.
I think I got 2 out of 3 last week, which is a 200% increase on the last time we did some previews and predictions. So yeah, we're going in the right direction. Chris, going to come to you first before we talk about this past weekend and the Matchroom card and of course the Top Rank card. We are a couple of weeks away. We can just sort of still see some of the war wounds from your win over Lawrence Okolie. How's life as world champion treating you?
Yeah, it doesn't feel much different. Frank, my son, won't let me be a world champion, so he still gets me up in the night and keeps me grounded. But no, it's been good. It's been great getting lots of a lot of people stopping me and stuff and thanking me and for a great night, and messages from so many people, and also message support for my mum as well, which has been really nice, and she's doing really well since her operation as well. So no, life is very, very well, thank you.
No, I haven't seen you since about 5:30 in the morning after the fight. Of course, we did our kind of customary post-fight interview at some ungodly hour, and then threw you into a taxi, into an Uber. But since then, of course, you've been out in Spain, you had holiday, you had a stag do. You managed to squeeze in a few rewatches of the fight at some point along the line?
I watched the fight once back one night on holiday when little man wouldn't sleep, and then I got him down and I couldn't get back to sleep. So I watched it then. It's not a nice watch, truthfully. It's hard to watch in terms of the style of the fight, and also there's a few things obviously I could have done better. But I did obviously got the win, and watched the knockdowns plenty, watched the ring walk plenty, and watched the scorecards getting read out a lot as well. So it's some bits are enjoyable to watch and some not so enjoyable, but forever in the memory.
Andy, we spoke about it, didn't we? Because we were, of course, there live in Bournemouth, and at the time, because you're live and you're in it, and it was the word that we describe is physical. It was a very physical fight. Of course, the underdog in Chris's case, shocking the established champion who was a big favourite going in, but it didn't feel like. I mean, I have gone back and rewatched it, and I do agree with Chris on a rewatch. It wasn't perhaps the absorbing spectacle that we found on the night.
Yeah, I watched it back, and there is a difference between being there and watching it on the TV. And I stick by what I said at the time. I found it to be a very kind of intense, visceral experience, being in the guts of it, in the middle of that stadium. I'll remember it. I'll remember it because it was a great night and brilliant weather. I thought the ring walks were spectacular. I thought the whole thing just built to a really nice peak throughout the week. All the stuff we did on the pier I really enjoyed. It was good to be out of London, somewhere a little bit different. And yeah, it is one that will live in my memory, certainly, because I've done a load of stadium fights now. I've been really, really lucky, and they're all kind of different. But that one was in kind of a category of its own, a little bit like Kelbrook Errol Spence, because Sheffield United was Kelbrook's kind of stadium. It wasn't quite on the same scale as Wembley and Cardiff and places like that, but it just had its own kind of feel about it. And you get that night once. We might see you back there, obviously, but you get that night once. And I did say during the build-up, I think I said it when we were chatting, me and Matt Macklin and George Groves, before we went to the ring walks, this could either be the best night of Chris's boxing life or maybe the worst, because if you'd lost,
could never have gone back there.
Yeah, Josh Warrington said the same when I spoke to him after his win against Selby at Ellen Road. That he said exactly that. He said in the weeks building up, he was thinking, God, in a way, this is terrible because I've been here hundreds of times, but I can't go back there if I lose. So the pressure was huge, and I had no idea from looking at you during fight week that there were any problems. But you alluded to them after the fight that things hadn't gone all that well. You'd been a bit sick for a couple of days. I wouldn't have known. You were the same kind of mentally consistent fighter that you always are. You had that clarity, which I think is really important that you always have, and you took care of business. And it was an absolute pleasure to watch, because I genuinely don't care who wins, but it's a real privilege to watch someone make their dreams come true in boxing from ringside. And you see it relatively often, but it never gets old, because I've got an idea of what goes into it. And yeah, seeing you sink to your knees when the cards were read out, yeah, it's magical stuff.
And he's only saying that as well because we were talking about dodgy predictions earlier, and Andy was the only one who predicted that you would win the fight as well. If you'd have lost, Andy would have been sitting there going, it was a terrible spectacle.
Well, I didn't want to mention it, Rob, but, seeing as you have.
Okay, before we move on and talk about kind of the boxing that we're here to discuss, not all about you, Mr. Billam-Smith, but what next for you? Obviously, Lawrence Okoli has the rematch clause. I know there's one or two kind of murmurings around Richard Riakporhe and some of the other guys at cruiserweight. What's next for you?
Fight-wise, I'm not entirely sure yet. I think the team will have discussions with Sky and stuff and see, what's going on. The Lawrence fight is obviously, if he's invoked his rematch clause, maybe, from what I've heard. But I'm not sure it sells, and that's an issue in this business. Is you can have all the want in the world, but it's a hard fight to sell first time round. But after the fight and after what we've just discussed about watching it back, I think it's difficult to sell it again. Obviously, as well, if I was his team, I probably wouldn't advise it, because you lose to me again, and where do you go? Which is obviously what would happen. And whereas he's got other options, he could win another world title at cruiserweight. He could go up to bridgerweight. He could go up to heavyweight. And that fight can always be there in the background, and the rematch, and it could be even bigger next time. And then obviously with Richard, there's also rumours of him potentially having a world title fight lined up, so that'd be great if he could win a world title and we get that rematch in the unification. The last one, cruiserweight, all British unification, was McNally, which was at the time a huge fight. So that'd be an honour to do that as well.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing it and seeing what's next for Chris Billam-Smith and indeed the cruiserweight division. But as I mentioned, there's plenty of boxing to get started on, or to reflect on this past weekend. There's really only one place to start, which was a fantastic composed performance. Lots of skill from somebody who we didn't really know how much they had going in against an established, strong champion. I am, of course, talking about Ellie Scotney's win over Cherneka Johnson. So going to come to you first, Chris, as of course the McGuigan's gym stablemate. You must be over the moon to see Ellie Scotney, somebody you train alongside and somebody who I know is a good friend of yours as well, get over the hump and pick up the IBF Super Bantamweight World title.
Yeah, it was amazing to be there. Me and Mia went up. and sat there ringside, and I was just so excited for her pop back to see her before the fight. She was in really good spirits, getting her hands wrapped. But yeah, she's just a really good performance. I'd probably give her like a 7 out of 10 in general. Maybe I'd bump that up because it's her first world title fight. It's her her 7th fight. You know, there's a lot of pressure on it. There's been so much going on. She's been in camp pretty much all year. But yeah, she boxed really well. I thought she was in control of the fight. I think I scored it 7-2 with 1 draw. So very comfortable win. I thought Cherneka Johnson got a really good jab, and she did jab well, but I think Ellie took that away from her. So she sort of took, like, Johnson was double jabbing quite a lot, and Ellie was just slipping and sort of stepping, pulling back and head checking, and she just took the jab away from her. And then by round 3, she was barely throwing a jab. And I think that's due to Ellie taking it away from her. Body shots, Ellie's a fantastic body puncher, and she showed that the other night. She was really hurting her to the body, landing some brilliant shots. Right hand over the top was a great shot as well, and set the pace pretty well. I think after the fight, Shane and Ellie were quite disappointed, but I spoke to Ellie today, and she said she watched it back last night and was, you know, she thought she boxed better than she thought she did on the night. So yeah, I was pleased with her performance as a whole, and just so buzzing to see her win. You know, we've been talking about these 2 fights that we've got and training together and doing our world champ circuit in the gym together and everything. So to see her do it the other night, and I know how much it means to her, and we got our picture of our belts. So that was a really nice moment, and yeah, you know, a few weeks that will live long in the memory.
You mentioned there about both her and Shane not being particularly pleased on the night, which certainly was what they said in the post-fight interviews. Is that just them in general? I mean, you mentioned Ellie not having the smoothest build up to it, which of course was supposed to be boxing in Dublin a few weeks ago. That ended up getting pushed. Was that just kind of how they operate in the gym, Shane and Ellie, or do you think that, you know, there is still a lot more to come from her?
Yeah, a huge amount to come from her still, because I've seen her spar in this camp, and it's been. When I've missed her spars, I've been disappointed, because I'm like, really want to watch it, because she's been sparring so well and better than what she boxed the other night. And it's a shame she didn't get to fully show that. But she's fighting a world champion, like a reigning world champion who's had a defence. You know, it's not a vacant belt. So that's another thing to add on to the first world title fight, only a 7th fight. And yeah, I think that's just... it's just a drop in the ocean for Ellie. I think she'll achieve much more, and she's got so much ability. Maybe the occasion got to her a little bit. Maybe Johnson was better than she thought she was going to, than Ellie thought she would be. But yeah, I think Shane holds such a high standard in the gym, which is why we get the success that we do. And I think they'll watch it back, and maybe Shane will watch it back and go, okay, it was better, but there's still more to come.
Andy, we speak a lot on the pod about kind of the growth of women's boxing, but also trying to be, you know, objective and see where it is compared to the men's code. It doesn't have that depth. I think it's quite, you know, signified by the fact that Ellie Scotney is now world champion after 7 fights, but still a good performance from her at the weekend, and somebody who I know that you've had your eye on for a long time, and you're a big fan of the Queen of Catford, aren't you? Yeah,
I am. We did the first couple of her fights on Sky. I think I might have done her debut, and she's a very good fighter. I've always thought that. In terms of outside of the ring, she doesn't maybe push herself and sell herself as aggressively as some other fighters do, but there's definitely a personality there. There's a really good sense of humour there. I think there are things you can do with her on that side of things as well. But the most important thing is inside the ring, and she's a quality fighter. And I agree with Chris. I think there's a lot that she can go on and achieve. And it's always good to hear that people aren't completely satisfied with a performance when they've comfortably won a fight for a world title. But I felt like she did win comfortably. She probably can perform better than that. And I don't really have any doubt that we will see her move to a different kind of level when it's required. But she's had to wait. She's seen other people attract the limelight a bit more than her, and it's probably been very frustrating at times, but she's bided her time. She's obviously just stayed in the gym, stayed ready, all of that kind of thing. And it was great to see her win. You know, I thoroughly enjoyed it because of that crop around bantamweight and super bantamweight around Britain. And if you throw Ebony Bridges into that mix, because she's kind of she's a British-based fighter.
She's from Leeds, isn't she?
Yeah, I have always felt like Ellie's the best. Just from seeing her, I have always felt that she's got the best tools out of them all, and just very keen to see what she goes on to do now. And winning a world title in that number of fights, that's quite normal in the female pro boxing side of things. As you say, the depth isn't there. That's just where we are at the minute. That will steadily change, but it's just big fights all the way through for her from now on, I think.
Who do you think is going to be? Because we don't really see in the women's code, unlike in the men's code, we don't really see, you know, champions go without big opportunities, really. You see the belts kind of come together a lot more frequently in the female code than we do in the men's code. You mentioned that kind of bunch down at bantamweight. You've got Ebony Bridges, we've got Nina Hughes, who of course boxed this past weekend as well. Who would you like to see next for? Has it got to be unification? There's featherweight as well. Obviously she's not the biggest super bantam in the world. I was talking about her doing bantamweight in the past. But where would you like to see her go next?
Could she drop down and box bantamweight, do you think? That might be a bit of a stretch.
I think it's too far. I don't know the last time she got under 122, as in like light.
No, I can't think either.
So yeah, I think it's too far for her. I wouldn't like to see her go down. I think she could, you know, do a good job. And I imagine some of those girls eventually will maybe move up as well.
Yeah.
And especially if the opportunity's there to fight for 2 belts and good money and stuff. So, you know, she's the champion now. I think she should stay there and let the big fights come to her.
I mean, if Bridges was happy to come up and fight her at super bantamweight, I think that's, you know, they're both with the same promoter. That would, you would imagine, be quite an easy one to make. And I think people would be interested in it because you've got 2 different kinds of characters. And that always works. You know, you've got one with Bridges, who I said earlier there were other fighters around her weight who've pushed themselves more aggressively, and that's her. And that's no criticism because you have to maximise everything you possibly can. And she's done that. You know, she's moved to the other side of the world to pursue her career, and you have to give her a lot of credit for that. And she's done it really, really well. She's been successful because people know her name. They know who she is. She was there doing punditry on Saturday. So I think there's something quite interesting you could do there with those 2 as a matchup. How willing or keen Matchroom would be to do it, I don't see why they wouldn't want to do it, to be honest with you. But it would involve Bridges coming up in weight. But then when you see her when she's kind of out of camp, it can't be easy for her to get down to bantamweight.
Stocky,
yeah,
muscular,
she is.
Chris, just coming over to you on Ellie. Obviously, she's been in the gym now for a couple of years, obviously 2 or 3 years that she's been in the gym. Obviously, she's turned over and boxed with Adam Booth previously. How different is she compared to, as a fighter, I'm talking, the Ellie Scotney that you first saw at McGuigan's gym, and who she is now and where she could potentially go? Yeah,
I think this camp and over the last year, she's really grown. Obviously, she had that Granani fight, which she was disappointed with February last year. On the Ryder Jacobs undercard. You know, she still won the fight, I thought, but she didn't box anywhere near. And then I think it's quite common, I think, under Shane, you go sort of through a transitional period. I've done it and had flat performances, but there's like a transitional period and you just stick at it. It comes to fruition. And that's happened with me. And I think that's there in plain sight to see. And I think that's happened with Ellie now. She's done that transitional period, and like I said, she's been such a joy to watch in the gym. So yeah, she's improved so much. She understands now. She understands what Shane's saying to her, and understands how to look after herself as well, which I think she learnt this camp in terms of recovering properly. Not just under eating, not just running every day that you're not in the gym because you need to get the weight off. Like the body, you have to look after it, and and then it will look after you, sort of thing. So there's been times where they've learnt to manage her recovery a lot better this camp, but to get her to buy into it was difficult because she's never had 3-4 days out of the gym. So I think Shane gave her like a couple of days off at the end of a week and have the weekend off, and she could just do like a run and a walk or something like that. And she did it, and she felt amazing coming back, rejuvenated, weight didn't go up. And it's just getting the buy-in from the fighter, and that's always the hardest thing, I think, with a coach or even a nutritionist or a strength coach, is getting that buy-in from the fighter. And especially in boxing, in terms of like when you're using like nutritionists and strength stuff in other sports, people turn up and they buy in. But boxing's so old school and so behind the times, I think it's really hard to get that buy-in because, oh, well, I've been doing this as an amateur for years and I've always done it this way and this way and this way. But when you turn professional, it's different and you have to do it properly. And I think now she's got that buy-in. Shane's got the buy-in from her. She's just going to keep leveling up and keep improving all the time. So it's definitely an exciting time for Ellie.
How different do you do things now? Because I mean, people who haven't seen it, day in the life of Chris Billam-Smith on Bet365, big up Bet365. We saw kind of there with you with like I still don't know what the glasses
blue light
are.
blockers.
Blue light blockers for the glasses, and then you have your mouth tape as well. Like one of the things that we discussed in the preview show, and you had a brilliant line that you said to Andy about not drinking. You're not talented enough to drink, and just kind of edging out those little 0.5% and 1% here and there. How different are you now compared to when you started, and when did that transition, as you referred to, take place?
Yeah, I think it's been, I've had sort of like numerous transitions as such in terms of my development as a fighter, because sort of coming to the gym and I was learning everything very new, and then I remember sparring Mickey Nielsen, who was obviously a solid pro, and I think it was still before my debut, and really like sparred him for 6 rounds because he was over with Sowlands and really struggled. Like I just couldn't punch for his guard, I couldn't do anything, and I just he just pressed me, landed like a few decent shots, never hurt me or anything, but the pressure for 6 rounds was just relentless because he has that like high guard, marches forward. I just didn't know what to do, and then gradually just kept improving. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I've always looked for those extra bits, and whether that's performance wise through nutrition or getting a whoop strap, which I haven't put on since fight week. First time I've seen you without one of them in a while. Yeah, I know. I mean, I had a 1% recovery on the Wednesday of fight week, so that wasn't ideal. So it's the lowest you can possibly get, and I've only ever seen them on hangovers when my mates have had a hangover. So and then getting the whoop and then the mouth tape to nasal breathe and all that, and it all adds up. Do you know what I mean? And for me, it's just they've all added up, and I think Shane always says consistency compounds. He doesn't like to use consistency builds success as my quote, but and I think that's just compounded over the years. All those little extra areas: the not drinking, the getting back in the gym, the staying in shape, the all those little things. And I think that for me was, and Ellie's similar in that sense. She's looking for new ways with a strength coach. She's looking, she's got a nutritionist. She's always looking to train, and she never has ages off. She's always back running and stuff. So it pays off, to take all those little things. And I say for me, probably in Kent, I sort of went through that, was going through quite a tough period. I think both personally, being so far away from home for me, because I didn't have a car, it was like 4.5 hours from home. We were in Kent all day, every day, just in the house to the gym, to the house, to the gym, to the house, sleep. And that had its toll over the couple of years we were there. Once we left there, the last fight I had there was a Tom McCarthy first fight. Then since then, I think my performances have been much better. So off the back of it, it's where I was, and I think I was able to allow all that work that I'd done with Shane out because I was more settled, had my own place. I wasn't sharing with the other lads. We had a proper kitchen in the new place, and everything was right. So it's important to get everything right outside of the gym as well, I think, and be comfortable there.
Okay, moving on to the other women's world title fight this past weekend. Andy, going to come to you as Nina Hughes in a real dominant decision win over Katie Healy. I feel like, again, we always try and be as objective as possible and try and kind of call things as we see it on the podcast, as we always do. I felt like Hughes Healy, certainly with all due respect to Katie, Healy wasn't one of those fights where you look at it and say, okay, this is where women's boxing is or women's boxing could be. I felt like it was, as far as world title fights go, it wasn't of the standard even of Ellie Scotney's bout with Cherneka Johnson. Do you think am I being harsh, or do you think that's fair to say?
No, I think that's fair, but an opponent fell out. So Healy had to come in late on, and it was just good that there was somebody available at short notice who was able to do that and keep the fight on, basically. So that's a difficult thing to remedy at late notice. It's not always possible. So I think you have to factor that in when you look at that contest. But it was a comfortable win, wasn't it? It was a comfortable win.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we were expecting to see Nina Hughes versus Shannon Courtenay. How do you think that fight would have gone if Shannon Courtenay would have been in there with Nina Hughes at the weekend?
It's interesting what's happened with Shannon Courtenay because
I've not heard a lot about her for a long time. Really.
Again, I did. I think 2 or 3 of her early fights when she turned pro, and there was a good amount of noise around her. She was building her profile outside the ring pretty well. I remember at fight camp when she lost to Rachel Ball, tight fight, good fight. And since then, I know she's come back since then, and I know that she won the title. She had the fight with Bridges, didn't she? Which was a good watch. But things just haven't really picked up for her. She hasn't managed to build too much momentum. So I don't really know kind of where she's at in her boxing career, sort of mentally, how she sort of feels about it at the moment, if you like. Because you need to know that, really, before you can make any assessment of what somebody may or may not be capable of achieving, for all the reasons that Chris was just talking about, really. Because fighters are humans, and if things aren't as they need to be, or mentally you don't have that focus and clarity that we were talking about earlier, then things can be really, really difficult. And inactivity can be a problem. So I don't know, is the honest answer. I don't really know where Shannon Courtenay's at.
Yeah, I mean, she's boxed once. She had an 8-rounder back in December, and that's the only fight that she's had since the Jamie Mitchell fight, which, of course, she was stripped on the scales and then lost the fight on the back of that. But yeah, it's quite strange because she was quite a prominent fixture.
She was.
Of around those weight classes. Certainly was able to garner interest and attention in her career. But yeah, interesting to see where she goes from there. Chris, your thoughts on this past weekend and your thoughts on Nina Hughes' win?
Yeah, I thought she boxed well. Like you said, it wasn't one that I'll go back and watch necessarily, but I thought we've had Nina in the gym sparring, Ellie and stuff, so she's talent, and I seen she had her son carry the belt to the ring, nice. Which is cool. Being a dad, that's a real cool thing to see, and that was nice. But no, she's a lovely girl, and I thought she boxed well. With the opponent she had in front of her, was landing good combinations. Sort of stayed out of range and sort of sprung an attack and stuff. And yeah, I thought I was happy for her, and yeah, I thought she boxed well.
Ebony Bridges versus Nina Hughes next. That do anything for you?
Yeah, I think that makes most sense. I think were they trying to make that on the night? I assume they were because Ebony was there and everything. So yeah, I assume that will be next because they're both bantamweights. But yeah, I think that makes sense. That fight is a good fight as well. Ebony always seems to be in decent fights. She lays it on the line, and Nina's busy, active, and I think that's a really, really good fight and a bit of a pick'em, really.
Okay, right, staying with Saturday night and the Matchroom card at Wembley, we'll go to you, Andy, first for the return of Sonny Edwards. Gave him quite the build-up on the preview show ahead of his bout with Andres Campos. Won by, pretty wide, comfortable scorecards, 117, 111 times 3. What did you make of the fight?
I felt like he did what he needed to do. I felt like he did hold his feet at times, as discussed last week. We thought he might do that and kind of let Campos into the fight at stages. At the end of the fight, in the interview, he suggested that he almost not let him have a few rounds, but did it his way for a few rounds and let him into the fight. And I wouldn't necessarily argue with that. I think it was maybe a slightly tricky one for Sonny Edwards because, as we were talking about last week, he wants these big fights. And it would have been great if he'd gone out there on Saturday and bamboozled him for a bit and then decided to plant his feet and taking him out. That would have been fantastic. But that was always going to be hard because Campos, as he showed, is a tough guy. And really it was a fight in the end that he just needed to get out of the way. And then he immediately called out Bam Rodriguez. He was a much better fighter than Campos. He did maybe go to the ropes a bit too much, but the point is he went to the ropes. He wasn't forced back to the ropes. He's comfortable there. It's not a great look for the judges at times. I don't think he would necessarily do that against somebody better than Campos. Tony Bellew entertainingly said at the end, didn't he, that if he boxes like that against Rodriguez, he'll get chinned. I don't think he will box like that against Rodriguez. He did a decent professional job, but it just felt, as I was watching it, like this was just something that he had to do. It was voluntary, so it wasn't something that he had to do, but he also did have to because he's just signed with a new promoter. And he just wanted to get it out of the way. And once he got it out of the way, that was the cut of his jib, if you like. And then he just needs these big fights because since he won the title, he's put in some good performances. And that fight he had towards the end of last year against Alvarado, that was a very worthwhile experience. Whereas Saturday was marking time, and it was no more than that, really. But that is an indication of how good he is because he won that fight comfortably. And yet we're looking at it and feeling like, oh, maybe this, maybe that. But it's no bad thing for him to walk away from Saturday with, as we said last week, with these people he wants to fight, may be able to look at that fight and all of a sudden be a bit keener on it. I mean, that you're never going to plan to deliberately give a few rounds away or deliberately not look that great. But if that's the upshot, then in the position he's in, that's not a bad thing.
Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought echo what Andy says in terms of at times he just allowed Campos into the fight, sat on the ropes. Campos had, was landing some really good uppercuts and really good body shots, I thought, throughout the fight. But you can't do that. Wouldn't be able to do that with a bigger puncher. Campos hasn't got a huge amount of knockouts on his record, and I think but then once again, I don't think he would do that. He's got so much ability, Sonny Edwards. He can box and run and box and move and be boring as such. He can put his shots together, and I think that's when you see the best of him, when he sort of stays in range and then just drops back and counter punches with puts 3, 4, 5 shots together. And I think that's when you see the best of him. He's got great variety as well from the southpaw stance. Got a great right hook to the body, which he started to really hurt Campos with, I thought, the other night towards the end of the fight, and sort of stepped up a gear and thought, okay, I might be able to get him out of him because he was just landing that right to the body. I think he threw it about 5 times at one point in the space of about 8 punches and just kept throwing it. But yeah, he's got so much variety in his work and so much ability. And like Andy said, I think that shows we're almost slagging his performance, for want of a better word, but he still won. And on our cards, he's still winning 117, 111, give or take a few rounds. But I think that just shows how good he is. And I think the big unification fights are exciting, especially the Rodriguez one, who a lot of people have got him sort of up there on the pound for pound list. And I think if you can make that fight, that's a fantastic fight for boxing.
Yeah, we spoke about it, didn't we, in the preview, where I kind of felt that, and we get so many wrong and we always point it out, but I kind of felt like he would box like that. And we were in the gym with him a few weeks before then, and he'd sort of mentioned that he was going to hold his feet a little bit more. I'm sure he won't mind me saying it, but he didn't prepare for that fight like he would a Rodriguez or a Martinez. It was very much kind of, I get completely what you're saying, and fighters won't look to go into the ring and underperform per se, but there is also kind of, people are quite well versed in preparing and having the right preparations for the right fighters. But
fighters are human, right? So yeah, you can only get so up for a fight, regardless of who it is. I've had the same thing at Zhozhai last December, and I think you've got this guy who, look at his record, he's not a massive puncher, and you can be 60% and beat him. So that's in your head, like that's just human nature. You can't control that thought. So I think that's the biggest the thing. So then when you got a Rodriguez in front of you, then he's going to be bang up for it.
Yeah.
No.
You those kinds of fights, it is difficult because you realise you just think to yourself, I've got to get through this. So like Zhozhai for you, like you said at the end of last year, I've got to get through this. Although he was a combative kind of dangerous guy if you let him. We saw what happened there, and I mean that finished perfectly with the way you took him out. But if you haven't got that knot of fear in your stomach that you might lose, then you're aware of it, aren't you? You're aware that it's not there, and so therefore almost kind of in terms of the mental intensity, you need to force yourself up to that level, or try and force yourself up to that level that you are naturally at if you've got that fear. And that's hard work. And that's why, like I said, I felt at the end of the fight, he just had the air of a man, Sonny Edwards, where he was just thinking, okay, good. That's out of the way now. There's always a chance things can go wrong. I never really thought they would because I'm so much better than him. But it's done now, over, and we can all move on. And that, I think those kinds of fights, weirdly, you don't want too many of them when you get to the level that he's at and he's at, because strangely, they could take it out of you a bit. It's a relief, isn't it? You're just relieved that it's kind of out of the way.
I felt Kell Brook had a lot of them in his career, like the Carson Jones fight, and like a lot
Jojo
of
Dan,
like fights where he couldn't get up from, and he was chasing big fights and stuff like that. And
camp's probably hard work,
yeah,
isn't it? Because
like,
you're getting up thinking, I've got to do this. Of course, I've got to do this. I've got to tick the boxes. But in your head, you're thinking, yeah, I could just not go today. This bloke's not going to beat me.
Yeah.
But
and that
it's an effort, isn't
it? It is the fact, but then obviously you have too many of those days where you miss a session.
It becomes ingrained a bit more, doesn't it?
And also, it's a mindset thing where you take a a day off, and then you're like, well, I can have another day off because I've already taken one. It's like when you eat one biscuit, you have to eat the packet.
No comment.
I actually left 2 hobnobs last night. I'm very proud of myself. And I think like you see it a lot with fighters have flat performances and stuff. I think Taylor Catchall, I think Josh Taylor in that fight thought the same as well, because Catchall hadn't shown anything. That was a great performance from him compared to the O'Hara Davies fight and things like that. So I think it happens, but it should be a lesson to never take anyone lightly and turn up to every session with the same intent. But it's definitely difficult because we're only human.
He kind of, our mate Barry Jones on comms sort of said he sort of went about it almost backwards, really, where he held his feet in the early stages. But I think that kind of signifies where he thought mentally he was in the fight, and the threat or lack of against Campos, where he felt like, we'll do it for 6 rounds or however long, but if I feel like I need to just get on the bike, then I'll do that. And then you kind of saw that in the late rounds of the fight where Grant Smith in the corner, his trainer, was just saying, look, box. And when he boxed, Campos really had no sort of answer for that. It was only the rounds where Edwards was holding his feet where he allowed it to be more competitive.
I'll tell you what, though, that for me, that shows a lot of confidence to do it that way around, because we've just been talking about the dangers of a fight that you can't really get up for. And the way that they can go wrong is if you start slow and the other person has a good couple of rounds, they get the wind in their sails, and all of a sudden something that should be straightforward could turn into life or death. And Edwards, he opened that door by doing it Campos's way from the beginning. But that just gives you an idea of what he's about, because in his head, he's just, well, we can do this any which way you want. So, well, right, we'll do it your way for a bit. Confident that he's not going to get caught and all of a sudden find himself on the back foot and in trouble. And in a way, like Chris was saying as well, in a way, of course, you critique what's in front of you and you try and look at that and what might happen if they did it like that against somebody else. But I don't think there's a lot of point in that, to be honest with you, with regard to this fight, because I think if he were to fight Rodriguez or Martinez, they're not Campos, and you tailor your plan accordingly, or you react to what's in front of you accordingly, and they're just completely, they're parallel universes, aren't they, really?
Yeah, and you mentioned it there. He did open the door. It wasn't so. Campos would have been encouraged by the first couple of rounds because he's probably thinking before he goes in there. It's going to be difficult to pin him down for the first 3 or 4 rounds, but when he slows down and I can start making my impression, then he can get into the fight. But Edwards did kind of stand there with him in the early rounds, and Campos had some success in the first couple of rounds. So he'd have probably been going back to his corner thinking, I don't know what this is on about. Everyone talking about him being this elusive master back foot fighter. I've got him where I want him. And then after 6 or 7 rounds, Edwards was like, okay, you've had your fun now, and I'm going to go back on the back foot. He's thinking, oh God, now I'm tired and I've got to chase him. Yeah. So it was an interesting performance. There were, as there often is in Sonny Edwards fights, there were flashes of brilliance. But I do feel like we'll see the best of him in those big fights, which is where we are going to go next. We're going to go to you first, Mr. Billam-Smith. Who do you want to see next? Is it the Bam Rodriguez fight? It's the one that he was seemingly calling for, or do we want to see, family honor and what have you with the Julio Cesar Martinez fight?
No, I think he'd comfortably beat Martinez, to be honest. Because I think he'd be switched on. He knows the dangers. Like, he's not going to give Martinez the same shots he gave Campos. And Rodriguez, that fight is so intriguing because they can both move so well, and obviously the style of Rodriguez is very sort of exciting and like technical, sort of a Loma sort of esque style, and where Sonny can do everything. It'd be interesting to see. And I think he'll have to. I think he'll have to box and move. I think he'll have to stand and fight. I think you'll get to see all of what we saw the other night, but to a higher level from Sonny. And then it's like, okay, who carries out their game plan best? Whereas Martinez, you know what he's going to do. He's going to run forward and Sonny's going to run and pick him off. And I think the intrigue of the Rodriguez fight is the one for me.
Andy?
I've always wanted to see him fight Martinez, but I just don't get the feeling that that's going to happen. And that's why he's calling the other name, why he's calling Rodriguez, because he feels like Rodriguez does fancy it. And the promoter does, obviously, and they're both with the same stable. So I think he's homed in on that one now as the one that he would prefer. And I think I would probably prefer that now too. I've changed my mind on that fairly recently because I've always wanted that Martinez fight. But if, it takes 2 to tango, as they say, and if the other guy doesn't want to do it, and it might not necessarily be the man himself who doesn't want to do it, because very rarely do fighters not want to fight. But I don't feel like the people around him want it. So that Rodriguez fight is, it's a great fight, and it's a great fight at any weight, but for the lower weights particularly, to keep that kind of, to keep that momentum going that's been building now, or has been sustained for a really long period of time. When you think about HBO getting into the super flyweights with Chocolatito and all the rest of them a good while ago, and that investment has continued from promoters and networks, which is great. And just to keep that rolling, I think is a really good thing for the sport in general. And Edwards he's an interesting character as well. He's always got something to say. There are very few subjects that he hasn't got something to say about. But I think he genuinely really enjoys social media. I think it's a stress release for him, weirdly, even though for a lot of people it could be an irritation. I think he's of that generation where all of that stuff, that's him. He's grown up with it and it's natural to him. It's no effort for him to kind of push that. But he needs a big fight. He needs a big fight next. It really needs to be next, because another Campos, and I don't see any prospect of it. I think something will get made, but another Campos, is no good for him.
Yeah, and I think he would have observed the IBF mandatory in November against Alvarado. Alvarado moving up, he was the mandatory, so he won't have another mandatory until the end of the year. But if he can get something booked in, you'd imagine that it will be a big fight next. Kind of in an ideal world, I think, and boxing is never ideal, as we all know. You kind of have like Martinez fight Dalakian next, beat Dalakian, or Rodriguez versus Dalakian, Edwards versus Martinez, and then at the end you have all of the marbles and you have Edwards versus Rodriguez, because I think that's the best fight in the division, and you'd want that to be for all the marbles if you could possibly have it. But I just don't really like Martinez has now got, they're still doing the McWilliams Arroyo fight, like that's been rescheduled 4 or 5 different times. They fought, they had the clash of heads.
Yeah.
Like, you just think like some fights are just not meant to be. That one's not meant to be.
Yeah,
Get rid of that.
It's hard to believe that that's going to happen, isn't it?
It's good. Your WBC have ordered it to happen, and they've got another mandatory afterwards as well. So it looks as though Martinez is going to be out of the picture anyway, which, I mean, it's very convenient for him. But you've now got a situation where it looks as though all paths lead to Edwards versus Rodriguez. So, Andy, going to come to you first. Now we've seen Sonny Edwards this past weekend. Admittedly, as you know, we've all kind of discussed, not the Edwards that I think we all expect to see in one of these big fights. But Edwards versus Rodriguez, who do you like?
I generally find it a really difficult one to call. I've really enjoyed watching Rodriguez. You know, the last couple of times there have been, you know, signs that he's what he is, which is a really young man, and not, you know, he's not a finished article. I wouldn't say. And as I said last week, you know, Sonny Edwards is somebody that I would never bet against with any certainty. If I did bet against him, I think there's a good chance I'll lose my money here, because he's just very, very capable of, I think, beating anybody. And you know, I include Rodriguez in that. So I would find it difficult to make any kind of firm prediction on it. I mean, it would be the other side of the Atlantic. I think it would, wouldn't it? That fight, almost certainly.
Yeah, I mean, Bam, they spoke about it, Bam and Robert Garcia, about coming over to the UK and fighting in the UK, but I mean, who knows?
Is it bigger there than here?
I think so. You could do it in
I think it is,
you do it in like San Diego, which is like a good little hotbed for those types of fights. They had Chocolatito Estrada 2 was there, and they do quite a lot of those like super flies. They all happen on the West Coast and like California, around that sort of area. You'd think it's a good fight there. Bam is obviously a big name in America. He has cooled a little bit, I think, in his last couple of fights. The Israel Gonzalez fight and the Christian Hernandez fight, which is what we spoke about in the preview, where he'd looked sensational against Carlos Cuadras and Srisaket or Rungvisai. But they're guys who are coming at you. They're slow feet. You know, they're almost perfect for somebody. I admit, it's still very impressive. He jumped from light fly to super fly on short notice, and you know, dished out a pretty one-sided, certainly of Srisaket. But just saw in the Israel Gonzalez fight and the Hernandez fight where he's just struggling a little bit with fighters taking that half a step back, which you would in theory play into Sonny Edwards' hands.
Yeah, it would. Of course it would. And also, any performance, you look at a fighter's body of work, and whatever they've done in the ring, it's something that's happened in real life. So it means something. But its relevance is, you know, it's kind of proportionate to the style of the fighter they then come up against subsequently, and what he was able to do against Cuadras and Rungvisai. How relevant is that in a fight against Edwards? I would argue maybe not that relevant. I mean, he's a big puncher, we can see that, but stylistically they're so different that whatever he's managed to do in those fights, it was impressive, but it stands apart from what could happen against Edwards.
CBS, Sonny Edwards versus Bam Rodriguez.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago I would have probably picked Bam, but watching him recently, like we were just talking about, I think I just edged Sonny Edwards, but you just never know, you know, like Bam's so young, improvements he can make, but like I said, like I think Sonny Edwards has got a lot more to his game. He's able to box on the back foot, can pick his shots a bit better on the inside, and it's not someone where if he does sit there, he's not going to sit there and just get teed off on. Excuse me. But yeah, I think I just edged Sonny Edwards in that fight, but no result I don't think would surprise me.
An interesting one to see, and it looks as though it's going to happen next. We saw the into the camera stuff, which I'm all for. Like, there's nothing worse than fighters who after we'll have to go back and talk to the team. Grab the camera. Yeah. Like I can't remember who it was. There's some MMA guy, I don't know, and he'd said like words to the effect of the next fight starts during the post-fight interview.
Yes.
So after that, and that's great. So it's one to remember.
I mean, my last post-fight interview was quite the opposite.
To be fair, yeah.
I was just like, I don't care.
Yeah, okay, we give you that. We'll give you that one.
That was. I mean, I found it interesting what you said in the ring, you know, because and it was completely understandable. But it just outlined the challenge for you now. I know we're going a bit off topic, but you described it as being a night that's going to be impossible to beat, or something along those lines. And that's going to be the interesting thing for you when you get back into your next camp, because you'll just think to yourself, okay, because you won't really know 100%, although you think you do, and you'll probably turn out to be right, but you won't know 100% whether the same level of hunger and desire is going to be there when you get back in camp for your next fight, having scaled the mountain. And this is something that all fighters go through.
No, I understand. I think for me, though, it's the pressure's off. So I think if anything, it will just let me loose, let chains are off, and I think it will let me loose. That's how I feel at the moment. But you're right. Yeah, we won't know until, I'm doing my first run tomorrow. So I'll let you know, Andy, how far I get.
Okay, right. We are there to discuss this past weekend in New York. Josh Taylor defended, unsuccessfully. So didn't defend. Unfortunately, lost his WBO super lightweight title against Teofimo Lopez. I think one of the tweets that I saw on Twitter yesterday, this is a huge day for the Teofimo Lopez pre-fight psychologists, of which we were two of them, Andy, in the build-up to the fight. I think a lot of people, I don't know, it's difficult to say whether or not we were hoodwinked or it was just one of those things where we kind of put the madness or the seeming chaos to one side for 36 minutes or so and produced an outstanding performance to become a two-weight world champion and two fantastic wins over Vasily Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez under Josh Taylor by Teofimo Lopez. I thought he was excellent this weekend.
Yeah, and our rule is, isn't it, on the boxing show, always props to the winner. Whoever they're up against, we'll look into what we felt Josh did or didn't do, I'm sure, but that is massive from Lopez because, like you say, he's now a two-weight lineal champ, the man at two weights. He was at lightweight. The record books might not show him as undisputed, but he was, because Lomachenko was WBC champion. We all know that. Taylor, by the time they met, had the one title left, but was the man. And that is, at 25, to have achieved that, it's huge. I mean, it's so big. And the reason I felt that Taylor would beat him would be because with everything that's going on around Lopez, I just wondered how possible it was to have had the kind of camp you need to have ticked the boxes you need to have ticked to keep all the doubts and fears and insecurities under control, to be able to step back up to that kind of level and produce the performance that he did. It wasn't really so much what he said during fight week. We can all live without that kind of talk, bodies on the record. It doesn't do the sport any favours. It doesn't do the individual any favours. But I could I wouldn't excuse it, but I can make allowances for what fighters say during fight week. Wilder goes there during fight week sometimes. And with some of them, it just seems to be they need to say something like that to help take them to that place where they're prepared to do whatever it takes to win. We could do without it, but Lopez is one of these people who seems to be able to switch it on the biggest nights because he's done it twice now, and that means that it's not some kind of coincidence. And he was excellent. And he looks big at super lightweight, doesn't he? Those shoulders and that neck. And
that was something that I didn't really anticipate because against Pedro Campa, his first fight at it was his second fight at 140, which you'd like to he reminded everybody in the week that he had boxed there before, but it's his first fight since moving up. And I remember thinking at the time, it doesn't feel like he didn't have that sturdiness, that presence that he had at lightweight. And I felt the same thing about his fight with Sandor Martin. Admittedly, Martin's a nightmare stylistically for anybody, negative southpaw mover. But he looked like he had that kind of that aura back about him. I know Taylor was physically bigger in the ring and would have rehydrated to a higher weight, but Lopez just seemed like he had that, particularly as the rounds went on, those middle rounds and towards the end when he's starting to, the leap-in lead hand that he caught Taylor with, those were things that we hadn't really seen of Lopez, I think, and he didn't really do it in the Lomachenko fight because he was having to be a lot more disciplined, but it kind of reminded me of that brash, arrogant, like the youthful Teofimo Lopez on the way up at lightweight, and he seemed to have his mojo back in there, didn't he?
Yeah, it was great to see because that kind of explosivity, not many people have got that, and you have to train well to be able to maintain that, and that can disappear really, really quick. He's 25 now, and that kind of style, that kind of output, generally speaking, you peak quite young. You think about somebody like Tyson and all of the stuff that happened in his life. We haven't got time to get into that. But your physical peak is going to come quite young when that's how you do it. It's the same for, look at a centre forward in football with electric pace. Someone like Michael Owen, his physical peak was always going to come quite young, and therefore he retired when he was 30, and that was no surprise because you get a few injuries and everything changes. And with Lopez, with the way things seemed to be going for him outside of the ring, you just felt like that peak might become even shorter, but he's still got it. And it's really good to see. It's really good to see. In retrospect, you feel like a bit of a mug. You feel like, look at what this guy did against Lomachenko. I think the fact that he boxed twice in quite a quick succession towards the back end of last year was probably good for him. Well, was definitely good for him. And with Taylor, the inactivity for Taylor's a problem, isn't it? Because it's 4 years and a bit since he won against Baranchik to get his first world title. And that was his 5th fight since. Only his 2nd in 2 years since he became undisputed against Ramirez. And that's a problem.
Yeah, particularly which we'll discuss with Chris, of course, former stablemate of Josh Taylor, particularly when you consider how busy he was and the fights that he was taking. I've always felt like we've discussed it on numerous instances about the way he was matched, stimulated in good fights at the right time on the way up. And I think before you knew it, become world champion, I think 15 fights, unified in 16, undisputed in 18. And then he's only boxed Jack Catterall since then. And obviously this past weekend as well. Just staying on Teofimo Lopez, we'll bring Chris in to talk about Taylor. But on Lopez, again, it's sort of like, it wasn't as well that, we weren't we picked Taylor to win. Everybody picked Taylor to win on the show last week, but it wasn't like it was, just in this camp we'd seen sort of Lopez say some strange things. This has been kind of a gradual build since the George Kambosos fight. Before the George Kambosos fight, there was a lot of warning signs. There was a lot of issues outside of the ring, and an ordinary fighter, you would expect that to play a significant role in what we saw from them in the ring, but maybe it did in the Martin fight and the Camper fight because he wasn't up for it or he wasn't in those modes. But one thing you can't deny, and I use the word ordinary deliberately because it seems as though we have in Teofimo Lopez an extraordinary talent and somebody who can live in such a seemingly chaotic life and kind of underperform here and underperform there, but on his big nights, not only does he show up, he really, really does show up.
Yeah, and so sometimes you get people who, whatever else is going on in their life, the gym and then the ring just becomes their sanctuary. That's where they can switch it all off. That's where they can concentrate and get away from it all. I mean, it's better, you would imagine, if there's not a load of stuff you need to get away from. And I think that longer term, he has got to try and achieve some kind of peace outside of the ring, but that's not completely within his control. He may well have been trying, but there are other people involved, and you can't really, there are so many variables to keep things settled and as you want them. It's not realistic. That's not real life. Any number of things can happen, but he would appear to be capable of compartmentalising, because he must have done that in the build up to this fight. The previous two, like you say, maybe he couldn't really get the bit between his teeth, but for this one, you can't turn in that kind of performance unless you've been on it in the gym, can you? It's impossible.
You're absolutely right, and I think I can relate to that in a sense in terms of compartmentalising it. And I think you sometimes that when you're in camp, that is your safe haven, and that's your in the gym or wherever that may be. That I think that can be exactly that. That could be your little safe haven where everything else goes out the window. I think if you're having a bad time, there's probably not a better sport for it. You can take your aggression out, your anger out, and your emotions out on an opponent or a punch bag or the pads, and get that release. And I think that's probably what he seems to have done. I mean, because like you said, there's no way you can go into the gym worrying about everything and perform not as well in the gym and then turn up and do a performance like that. So his camp's obviously gone well as well in terms of he's turning up to the gym. Like he's missing sessions. His performance would suggest he was having days off here and there. it was a great performance, I thought.
Yeah, and he's got this whole siege mentality thing that him and his dad have got going for them. Sometimes maybe that's just the way that they do things and the way that they get up for things. And maybe there's an argument. I mean, sort of going back to a football analogy, you mentioned there about Michael Owen. People used to say about Wayne Rooney. Remember, people used to say, you got to get him to stop doing this and stop arguing with refs and doing this. And you say, well, if you strip all of that kind of, it's not the same, but strip all of the chaos and the crazy out of him, then he's not the same player. And maybe Lopez needs that kind of, that siege mentality. They're all against us and they want us to lose. And obviously, he's got his own kind of personal issues going on as well. But maybe they need to create, because a lot of the stuff that he says is delusional, or certainly kind of comes across that way. But maybe he needs to build this kind of alternate universe essentially around him to get him in that mindset.
Yeah, and also, if that's how you've always been, then that's not out of the ordinary. We look at it and think, oh, wow, imagine carrying on like that, because we don't do it ourselves. Yeah. But if that's how you've always been, then that is your reality. That is consistency. It might seem wild to people looking from the outside in, but I don't really mind people who are volatile in that way, even athletes, like it's, if they're comfortable with it, and if that's how they've kind of lived their life, and emotionally that's how they've always been, just constantly riding that roller coaster, and you manage to get to the elite level of sport that he has, then they can obviously handle it. It doesn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't be even better if his life or his emotions weren't like that, but he's got there. He's got right up to the top with that being just kind of how he does it. And it is easy to look in from the outside and look at the old man and all the rest of it and just think, wow, this should be like this and this should be like that and all the rest of it. But this is a really extreme thing that they're doing in there. Yeah. And however you choose to try and handle that, it's just whatever works for you. It's like a kind of boxing technique almost. There's a manual and, work off the jab, do this, do that. But a good technique is one that works. A good mental, emotional approach is one that works. It's that simple. It might not be for everybody, but if it works for him, then he may as well just keep doing it like that. But it would appear that he's the kind of guy who he really does need that pressure, that knot of fear to really get up for things. But that just means they've got to deliver him big fights. There's no point delivering him anything else. I think I don't even really know whose fighter he is these days. But
he's still with Top Rank. But
right.
I mean, obviously had all sorts of problems with him in the build-up to this fight.
But they'll know there's just, it was the right thing to do at the back end of last year, rehabilitate him or get him back in the ring in the way that they did. But from now on, it's got to be just big fights, because if you get him an underwhelming opponent, he might get beaten.
Chris, going to come to you on Teofimo Lopez first. It seemed to me, at least, it was a performance of control. It was a performance of discipline. It was a performance of pretty much all of the things that many people, us included, doubted whether or not he had the mindset, the capability to do on the night. But he did so, and he did so very, very impressively.
Yeah, patient as well is another one, because you've got to trust the process when you're fighting someone like Josh Taylor, who starts fast, and the way he fights. You've got to, if you're not meeting him for work rate and you lose a couple of rounds early on, then you've got to really trust the process that whatever you're doing is going to work. And I think that's what he did really well. I thought it was a really good performance from him. So variety, of his shots, the body and head, I thought was really good. And I, like you guys, picked Taylor to beat him. I thought Taylor was looking good from the bits I saw on the pads and stuff, and knowing him and not knowing him as well now, obviously, because he left a few years ago, but knowing his mindset and stuff, he looked in a really good place. And obviously he said that since in the post-fight interview, said, look, I've got no excuses, I had a fantastic camp, and from my point of view, it certainly looked like that. So I picked him for the same reasons, in terms of Lopez didn't look like he was in the right headspace, and when Taylor's in the right headspace, most of the time he's really hard to beat anyway. So if you're not on it, you're in for a hard night. And I thought it was a fantastic performance from Lopez, and I truly got it wrong. I thought Taylor would do a number on him and beat him comfortably on points.
Is it, again, sort of similar to what we were talking about there? You've got Josh Taylor, everything's great, everything's in the right place, and then you kind of look over the other side, and like before the fight, if you listen to what both fighters were saying and knowing their makeup, and then afterwards you say, one had a career best performance and the other one, I think, there's a disappointing performance from Taylor in a different way to the Catchall fight, but still, I mean, it lost the fight, its first official loss as a professional. You probably would have got it the other way around when you were listening to all of the stuff that came out of them. Just
on that Rooney comparison, that's actually a really, really good comparison, because people who follow football will remember this. There's that clip when he scores that incredible volley, I think, against Newcastle. He's berating the referee. He's absolutely shredding the referee to pieces and looks completely out of control, frothing at the mouth like he's about to explode. Then he notices the ball dropping near him. Never mind that, and just hoofs it straight in the top corner. And because that's just how he's always been.
Some people,
that's just how he is.
Yeah, and it's just how you kind of good point that you'd made before. It's
he's not just out of control doing it. It's just it looks like
but that's just how he does things. And you can imagine him being the same way, running around a playground when he's a young kid, and but it's as you've said there. So it's not just athletes as well; it's fighters. I mean, this man to my left, I think, is quite often use you as an example of a fighter who is a little bit more, I guess, kind of normal. Suppose you don't quite live you are the gentleman. You don't quite live your life in the same sort of chaos.
But there's nothing normal about the right hands he took off Lawrence Okoli. I mean, to be able to do that, you're not a normal person, and you're not though. The fighters are not normal people.
No, they're not.
It's as simple as that, and that's not an insult. It's said with the utmost respect and reverence, actually, because I'm looking into this kind of quite deeply at the minute, and they're not normal people. And what they have to go through sort of mentally to put themselves in that place where you're prepared to do something like that and not flicker it's mind-blowing. And however you need to do it is however you need to do it, and it's not a one-size-fits-all.
I think as well, like you said, like with Rooney and Lowe, I think the very best sportsmen are always
on the edge,
unhinged slightly. You look at even watching like the Last Dance with Michael Jordan, like, and a lot of people hated him, and then you hear all these stories about these great people, and there's always something missing. I mean, maybe more in boxers, more so in boxers, because you've got to have something, and the way that what the sport does to you mentally as well. Like, everyone goes through a bout of not, feeling their best mentally and stuff like that. It happens to every fighter. It's part and parcel of the sport, and it's getting through that. But it happens in elite sport. You're very, very, all the greats through time of sports people, majority of them, Tiger Woods, everyone's got like something that seems supernatural in them. And I think obviously Lopez is of that ilk.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. And often it's that thing that makes them, I'll give you a line from The Wire. McNally, what makes me right for this job makes me wrong for everything else. Yeah. And sometimes with elite athletes, that can be the case. What gives them that spark and makes them have that desire and that craziness to just pursue everything to the nth degree. All the stories about, even if I'm playing table tennis against my 3-year-old, what I have to win. All of that kind of stuff, it can make you quite wrong for lots of other things. There's so many sacrifices to be made. I mean, like you say with Chris, I'm sure there's times where Chris is very hard work to be around. We don't see it, but I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are.
Speak to my wife. I'm sure she'll have plenty.
Be up the original MBS. There we go. Just going to come to you, Chris. Before we hear from Josh Taylor, what did you make of his performance?
I thought he started really well. I mean, after 4 rounds, I had it 2-2. To be fair, I think I gave Josh the first and the third, and then Lopez just nicking the second and fourth. So I thought he started really well, but I think the body shots from Lopez played a massive part. And I think, I've seen the interview. I think not to spoil it for everyone, but he talks about just, after 4 or 5 rounds, I started feeling flat, and I think it's the body shots. They take out you don't feel them at the time, and then in the 6th round had a really good start, sort of 45 seconds to start the round, started fast, sort of probably felt the fight was maybe slipping, because I think by then I had Lopez winning. Started really well, then gets hit with a monstrous body shot about 45 seconds in, and then for the rest of the round we didn't throw a shot for about 30 seconds or threw like one shot for 30 seconds, and then just sort of moved and jabbed and stuff, and that's That's not Josh Taylor. Do you know what I mean? That's not the way to beat Lopez. Is just pot shotting him unless you're that sort of fighter. But Josh Taylor wins because of his relentlessness, his combination punches, his variety in his shots, and he wasn't able to do that because he didn't have it in the tank. And I think that's, you could sort of see that in the corner, and Joe McNally was asking for it in the corner, like, do this, don't try and one-shot him. But I think Josh was sort of looking at for like, just I need to slow him down and take someone out of him because I'm not feeling 100% here. At the time, he wouldn't have felt the body shots land necessarily, but they're just taking it away from him, and that's what happens with body shots. And I think, to go back to Ellie, I think that's the same thing happened in her fight with with Johnson. I think she hit her to the body so much it started slowing her work rate, Johnson's work rate down. And I just saw that. I think that was the biggest key. I think Taylor's got such a good engine. He's always been known for a good engine. Had a phenomenal camp. Had no excuses. Made the weight perfect. Rehydrated perfect. But still didn't have an engine. So there's the only excuses from what Lopez did well. And I think that was the body shots. I think that's the difference. He took his engine away from him. And by landing some real well-placed, heavy body shots. And then, obviously, like I said earlier, Lopez's variety is really good. He count as well. So later on in the fight, Taylor would start that double jabbing his way in before starting his attack like he always does. But then he'd just get countered before he even lands the second jab with a right hand. In the 9th round, he got caught with a really good right hand as he was trying to do that. And Lopez I thought he boxed superb and did what he had to do against Taylor. Taylor's has a high guard, so the body's and a long torso, so the body's there. A lot of the time he I think Joe sort of speaks about it as well. He doesn't want him standing tall. He needs him lower down because then his elbows can block the body more. And Josh Taylor's got fantastic hand defences. I would say they're not as good as they used to be, but his head movement's always good. His feet are good. I thought he dropped back well and countered with the left hand, but then there was nothing off of it. It used to be a drop back left hand, double jab, left hand, right hook, and sort of seen his right hook disappear from him as well in the last few years. Catchall fight didn't throw, it was just looking for the left hand, and that was the wrong shot I thought in that fight. And then the other night as well, he was looking for it from a position of sort of throwing it now and again, but Lopez was able to get under it, so he wasn't lifting it enough. But yeah, like I said, thought he started well, but I thought Lopez took the engine out of him.
Okay, well, Andy Purwell, shout out Andy Purwell of Boxing News, was stateside in New York this past weekend. He caught up with Josh Taylor the day after the fight, and here's what the Tartan Tornado had to say about his loss to Teofimo Lopez.
I've got the winner's mentality, champion mentality, and want to win all the time at all costs. But last night just wasn't to be, got zero excuses, better man won on the night. I believe that on my night, I can beat Teofimo Lopez 6 out of 7 days. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, he beat me last night. He got the game plan well. I thought I started off really well. I started off strong. Had a bit of success with my left hand and going up and down. But after about 4 or 5 rounds, I said to Joe in the corners, my legs are away. My legs are gone here. And because I was having success with the left hand, kind of loading up well a little bit, stopped working off the front hand, and I strayed away for the game plan and never executed it well. So from then on, I had a couple of rounds off, and then I had a good couple of rounds, 9-10, and then the championship rounds, I just had nothing left. Just had zero energy left. I was fit enough. I was in impeccable shape. Just fucking exhausted, I think that my days at 140 are well and truly finished. I think I've been knocking on the door and moving up for the last couple of years, and I think I've been to the well too many times at 140 now, so I'll be moving up to welter for the rest of my career now. I'll be much more comfortable.
So that was Josh Taylor the day after his loss to Teofimo Lopez. Andy, going to come to you there. Just echoed really what Chris said. Thanks for spoiling the interview for everybody, Chris. Where he said that he made he was in impeccable shape. He made the weight well, but he just felt like after 4 or 5 rounds, his legs weren't quite with him, and he wasn't able to do what we've kind of grown accustomed to seeing of Josh Taylor, which is keep that engine going and motor on in the second half of the fight, and a potential move up to welterweight seems very, very likely for the Tartan Tornado.
Yeah, and we talk about it often, don't we? When somebody loses, particularly for the first time, then you need to be able to explain it to yourself. You need to be able to sell it to yourself. And I love the fact that in the ring he said what you want to hear, which is no excuses, the better man won on the night. Generally speaking, not too long after that, we'll hear an explanation, and that'll be what they are clinging to and using to sell the defeat to themselves in a way that makes sense, because losing to the better man, that doesn't really work. That doesn't really work, does it? I don't think. You need something else, and if he's going for the weight, then he's going for the weight. I don't know whether that move up to welterweight, £7, it's a lot. I'm not sure, but if he's decided that that's what it is, and only he knows how depleted he was from making 140, I don't know about that myself. I think welterweight could be hard work when you look at some of the fighters who were in that division. I mean, I would say that probably just as likely an explanation for why it happened would be what Chris said, which is the inactivity coupled with an excellent performance from a really good opponent.
Yeah, it's something that we've spoken about in the past, and something that we'll hear shortly from Joe Mack as well, Joe McNally, the trainer. He is, by his own admission, a career 140, did the weight very well. I think we were all, certainly as somebody who I'd known Josh and followed his career, and I know you as well, where you look at him on the scales and you looked at him beforehand, and I felt like he looked great. I felt like the face was good. It certainly wasn't, we've had some horror show weigh-ins for Josh Taylor in the past, particularly the Jack Cattrall one. Chris, going to come to you on Josh's potential move to £147. How do you think that works out for him? And do you think that's something that he should be looking at this stage of his career, or is it staying at 140 and chasing a Lopez rematch, or trying to get a Devin Haney or somebody like that?
Yeah, I think for the rest of his career, he's got to look at what and sit down and decide what he wants to achieve, because what else can he achieve other than becoming a two-weight world champion and obviously unified or undisputed at that? But there's some really hard fights up at welterweight, and the extra £7 isn't going to help. And I think Lopez may have shown people how to beat him in terms of investing that body, and it will slow him down. I remember Shane always saying he should never go up to 147. That was always Shane, even when he was in the gym. He didn't struggle to make 140. He made it, but it was the right side of the line. And I think the other night showed, and all the chat after showed that he was the right side of the line. But what do you do at 140? What do you do at 147? It's difficult. If you can get an easy touch, from a management point of view, you want to be looking at maybe an easier touch for a title up at 147. Once they, we're expecting them to get diluted after Spence Crawford, but then that's what you'd be looking at. But you don't want to put him in there with a Boots Ennis. And also you don't want to give him many interim fights, because that's when, what we were talking about earlier, you get flat performances. But he also needs to build slightly into the weight, because you can use, say it's a struggle to make 140, use £5 of that to put on size, and then you've got that extra £2 where it's not as much of a struggle to play with to get down. But I think for him, it's a confidence thing. I think you got the lack of confidence after the Cattrall fight, and he's been all that inactivity. Then the other night had his confidence taken away from him in the ring, like during the fight, and I think you saw that in the corner. Like Joe's telling him what to do, and he sat there almost like, well, I don't know, like I want to do it, but I can't, because I'm absolutely done. So it's I think it's hard to go straight into a world title fight at 147, because you haven't got that confidence, and who's he going to fight? But then what do you do at 140 when you've achieved it all? And it's a tough one, because you're also not going to want to retire on the back of a loss and a bad performance across the space of 2 years. It's been a long time since he's had that comfortable winning feeling of success and an elation night, which he wouldn't have had after Capture, even though he got a decision. So he's in a real tough spot. I feel for him because I know him, and it's a difficult decision to make. I think he needs to have a bit of time off, but with Josh Taylor, not too much time off, because he likes to have a drink and he likes to party. So it's I think he's got a good team around him, Joe McNally and stuff. So hopefully they're getting back in the gym and they make their decision.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You think, you look at it from an achievement point of view and kind of, okay, this is how I want my career to go. But also trying to look at it from the boxing point of view. And we saw Ricky Hatton, when Hatton moved up from 140 to 147. And at 140, you're this bull and you're able to just kind of find the bits on the inside because you're so much physically stronger and you're able to find those pockets. And we saw him when he moved up and he boxed Collazo, how difficult he found it to do that. And that was a Hatton who, at the time, and Hatton also, kind of well known, enjoyed his time out of camp, but was probably a fresher fighter then than Josh Taylor is now at this stage of his career. And you just wonder, and if you're in the Josh Taylor business, worry, I guess, about who he could end up fighting up at 147 pounds. It kind of Top Rank, who he's still signed with, as far as I'm aware anyway, I assume he's still with Top Rank, between 126 and 140 they have a lot of options, and you kind of go to 147 and 154 and you've got, that's really Al Heyman's territory. 147 pounds is very well stocked at PBC and of course above that as well. He had the WBO title for a while, the way that the WBO do it, as much as all of the other sanctioning bodies do it, they kind of do it. Yeah, maybe if we decide, then you might be able to do this. As the WBO cruiserweight champion of the world, you could move up, but unless you're designated the super champion status, which is kind of at their discretion, which means if they like you, they'll do it, and if they don't, they won't, then you're not mandatory. Same for Taylor. I don't know whether Taylor is a super champion with the WBO. If he is, he can go up and become mandatory. But as you mentioned there about Spence Crawford, all of those belts are going to be on the line. If they become fractured, there's a certain Virgil Ortiz who is mandatory for the WBO 147-pound title. If Taylor were to move up and box somebody like Virgil Ortiz, I think at this stage of his career, with Ortiz being fresh, big 147, we know how much he struggles to make the weight and has that freshness, that speed. That's a really hard fight for a Josh Taylor moving up to 147 pounds. So he's in a bit of a quandary here, Andy. And while he's achieved everything that he could have ever wished to set up.
What about Avanesian as a kind of interim fight? I know it doesn't really do anything for him, but he needs a win. He needs to win. Yeah. And I'm not writing Avanesian off because he's a good fighter. He's a real hard fighter, and he will think to himself, oh, I fancy this.
And stylistically,
I can drag Josh Taylor into this. I'm the bigger guy, all that kind of thing. But I think Chris is. I think that breakdown was very pretty spectacular. In fairness,
who needs
and but confidence is definitely a thing, isn't it? Again, that's another thing that it's really easy if you're kind of like in our positions to think to just not factor it in quite as much as you should, because he's been an undisputed champion and these guys seem bulletproof, but his confidence will be low because he's we know what happened against Catterall. And then he was well beaten the other night. His confidence will be low. So that kind of getting back in the saddle fight, I think, although he wouldn't admit it, in his own mind he would know, is still dangerous enough that he'll be able to really get up for it. Because if you lose that, then it's over, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I certainly think that he needs to. Taylor needs to have a comeback fight, so to speak. I don't think he needs to be treading water at 147 and have 3 fights in the next 12 months. No. Certainly some sort of comeback fight.
Get him out again before the end of the year, though.
I think that's essential,
doesn't he?
I think that's essential. I think he really needs to be, because I mean, he was hurt in the later rounds of the fight against Lopez. Certainly in the 12th round, he was hurt, but it wasn't a savage one-sided beating. He didn't, he's taken more shots in some of the fights he's won than this past weekend. But still, you wouldn't want to see him on the back of 15, 16 months of inactivity to have another 6, 7, 8 months out, and we don't see him until February, March next year.
With fights recently, it is hard when someone's been out for a really long time. Lawrence was out for a long time when he came back. Boazzi was out for a long time when he came back, and you want to see people totally fresh and reinvigorated and really turn it on. But I mean, kind of back in the real world, that's probably not going to happen, is it, after that amount of time out?
I always think I don't believe in ring rust, because I think ring rust is a mental thing. I think it's like, if you're in camp for all that time and you have 3 cancelled fights and you're out for a year, I think that's very different to being emotionally invested outside the ring with disputes or changing teams and all this. I think that's very different. I think that takes a lot of toll, and I think that's the ring rust as such. You know what I mean? So it's not actually ring rust of being out of competitive sort of fights and stuff. I think if you're sparring plenty, you could spar and have time out and still do, you know, in between my Craig Glover and Nathan Fawley fight, I was out sparring Marius Bridis for 2 weeks, which was invaluable because COVID hit as soon as I got back. So that for me was like an absolute godsend. I didn't end up fighting Nathan Thorley until the August.
That's a really good point now, actually.
It's keeping yourself, you know, otherwise if you're having loads of time out of the gym and as well as the you know, the fights, then that's when ring rust can set in. But I think ring rust is a training thing and a mindset thing more than the fight night thing and the fight week thing. That's how I've always seen it, and I think it's more of a mindset thing and how you feel, like both within yourself, confidence and stuff like that, and focus, but also actually going through the motions of sparring and stuff like that. If you spar for a year, you know, if you did 3 camps that never resulted in a fight, you're still going to be ready to fight again because the camps are where all the work's done.
True. And I guess the reality is as well that if you have an extended period outside of the ring, the chances are that there's been some kind of ball ache going on, whether it's a contractual thing, a managerial thing, fights falling through, the will they, won't they, catarrh thing, and an injury. You're not going to, at that point in your career, choose to be out for that amount of time. So there'll be a reason that's probably driven you slightly insane.
Yeah, and I think you see that the other night, Taylor it wasn't a terrible performance from him. And he's had all that time out of the ring after Catchall, but he's had scheduled fights. So I think that goes to show that he didn't have ring rust because he'd had the camps, he'd done the sparring, he'd done the rounds. Whereas other people, maybe Lawrence during his time out was out of the gym, not sparring for a long time and not focused because he had other disputes going on. So I think that's the difference in time out and ring rust, because they would have had a similar time out of the ring.
So it's why you were out.
Yeah, why you're out, and out of the ring isn't out of the gym. You know, and I think that's people mistake that for the actual competitive fight week. They just see, well, he hasn't boxed for 3 years, but you could travel the world sparring the very best for 3 years as a 10-0 novice, come back and be absolutely phenomenal and be on the door, like start beating European champions after only boxing journeyman, because that experience you've had is phenomenal. And I think that's the biggest thing that people don't realise with ring rust is what you're doing in that period of inactivity of actual competing. And
if you throw in during a lengthy absence a change of trainer, which is what's happened with Taylor, and again with that amount of time out, that can be something that quite regularly does happen in that interim period. That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually, isn't it? It's that length of time out. What's caused it is often the problem.
Yeah, and what you're doing in that time out as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, up next we're going to hear from Josh Taylor's new trainer, Joe McNally, who had this to say after Saturday night.
First and foremost, I'm proud of Josh. You know, we fought his heart out. He never put the performance in that we you know, planned on doing. But you know, credit to Teofimo Lopez. He's top drawer. He's a fantastic fighter, and you know, we come away with a good victory. And you know, there's things we could have done and not could have done, but the sport of boxing, you win some, you lose some, and the champs took his first L. But look, at the end of the day, it's fine margins at this level, and you know what, credit to Lopez, he pulled a fantastic victory out the bag.
It seemed to be the perfect start for Josh. He started those first few rounds very well. What changed? What changed the momentum of the fight to see Teofimo start to grow into it after that?
Yeah, do you know what? I'd have to watch it back, but you know, well, the plan was going to plan. At the start, he was sitting low in his guard, bending at the waist a lot, which, you know, to nullify his pot shotting and utilising his fantastic jab that he's got. Josh Taylor, you know, has got a really thudding jab, and when he uses it, it's a marvel. And I wanted him to, you know, really draw TO's one-shot counters and then put the pressure on him and work in combination. And with the first 4 rounds, it was coming off really nicely, and he was. I thought, right, here we go. You know, things are going to plan and this, and you know, I don't know if he got with a little body shot or, you know, he got his attention, but he sort of went from the strategy to looking for a home run and really looking for one big home run all the time, which, you know, sort of played out. And yeah, I'd have to watch it back to see where he drifted away. It was very hard getting him back to get back to the game plan.
So that was Joe McNally, kind of echoing a lot of the things that you'd said already, Chris. I know you did watch the interview, so maybe you were just kind of lifting stuff straight out of there from Joe McNally.
I've got it in my notes on my phone from when I watched the fight, actually, before I watched the interview.
But yeah, he did mention about, you know, the game plan sort of going awry after 4 or 5 rounds, and Taylor potentially being hurt by a body shot, which is of course one of your observations. Obviously, as somebody who shared the ring with him for a number of years and worked with your trainer Shane McGuigan, how do you see Taylor now compared to where he was? I mean, the last fight would have been the Prograis fight for him in the gym.
Yeah, I think Joe's done a good job. I think under Davison he was trying to get him to box too much, and that's just not Josh Taylor. Like, I understand that you might want to try and change a fighter, but I think you've sometimes got to work with the fight you got, especially when they're already a unified world champion. You don't try and change them too much. And I think Joe's done a good job with Taylor. I think you can see that even the other night. You know, he might have got beat, but he's in there with a very, very good fighter. And he was just dropping back really well, and he did some really, really good things throughout the fight. But yeah, I think, you know, maybe the best Josh Taylor we've seen, but that could come down to numerous reasons, many variables in terms of he's achieved everything. I always worried for Josh when he achieved everything he wanted to, which was become undisputed at the weight at that time. I always worried about him after that, and I think you sort of seen that in the Catchell fight. Sort of took his eye off the ball a bit, because even after what he won his world title, he was like, I thought I'd feel different, but it's because he's not done yet. He's not number one in the division. So, but when you become number one in the division, what else is there to do? So it comes down to that, taking your eye off the ball, and like what we're talking about, having that motivation there and for the fight. But I think he had motivation for this fight, and I think he's definitely nearer the very best version of Josh Taylor than what we've seen in maybe previous fights like Catchell.
And it's something that we've spoken about on numerous instances, but with numerous different fighters, and it is that, you know, once you get to the top of the mountain, there is, for pretty much everybody apart from Floyd Mayweather, really only one place to go eventually. Do you think we've now seen the best of Josh Taylor?
I hope not, but I think there's a reasonable chance that we have, just because of the scale of the achievement. It doesn't get any better, like Chris said. And you look at the run of fights. Branchik was a really entertaining fight, good win. Before that, we had Postol. Really early in his career, we had Dave Ryan. I remember being at that fight, his 5th or 6th fight. Really good bit of matching. And we've spoken before about what a good job the McGuigans did with him. And then Prograis was spectacular. I was ringside for that. One of the best fights I've been ringside for, in terms of the entertainment factor, but also the skill level, the technical ability they both had. It was brilliant, absolutely superb. And then I loved his performance against Ramirez, watching that late at night. Unfortunately, it came during the COVID era, which was a shame. But again, that was, you know, to go away from home and become undisputed in the way that he did it. You know, that run is absolutely epic. And there is only one way you can go from there, and that is down. And getting an underwhelming mandatory defence, which is what he got against Catterall, that comes with the territory of having that amount of belts. And all of a sudden the challenges are slightly different. You get a fight that you don't really want, even though it's against a fellow Brit, and on paper that's a massive thing, because it's the first time we'd ever had that scenario, an undisputed, a fight for all the belts on UK soil. But maintaining that motivation is hard. It's a difficult thing to do for anybody, and we haven't had many people who have been in the position that he's been in. So maintaining the level of focus you need to keep the performances right up where they need to be is just an incredibly difficult thing. So I hope we haven't seen the best of him, but I think that logically we probably have. It'll take something special, I think, to see him get back to that or surpass that peak that he set for himself performance-wise. And if he can do it, then that would be one hell of an achievement. That's how hard that is. It's not intended as a criticism in any way. It's a compliment, because when you've been that high, how do you sustain that and surpass it even? I don't think it's almost impossible.
Just touching on one of the things that you said there about winning the undisputed title, it was kind of away from home, it was behind closed doors. I think they had a small amount of people that were there, one of these COVID shows that we've kind of, I don't know, largely forgotten about, really. Not that specific show, but generally speaking, the kind of the COVID.
Yeah, it's like another life, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But even that was on Fight TV. I remember there was all the hoo-ha about it beforehand, about it not being picked up by a British broadcaster.
Yeah.
It's something that was said even in the build-up to the fight this week by Josh Taylor about not having the media interest that he felt he deserved.
I agree with all of that. I agree with all of that, and I found it enormously frustrating from a selfish, childish point of view that I wasn't commentating on that fight at the weekend, because that was on Sky, and to have a British fighter, world champion, headlining at Madison Square Garden in a fight of that scale, and to kind of not be doing it. If the Sky bosses are watching this, then so be it. And to not be doing it, I thought I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I just didn't. And I know some of the reasons behind it, but I look at Taylor's career and it was COVID, but I just don't want him to be that fighter where if he gets to the end he'll feel like he wasn't as appreciated as he should have been. Because you look at his great hero Ken Buchanan, that's what happened to him. He headlined Madison Square Garden a number of times, but he wasn't as valued in this country as he probably should have been, and it's criminal when things like that happen. And I just really, really, really don't want that for him. But he's got to climb the mountain again, I think, for people to get the amount of recognition that I feel he's due, because people have short memories.
They certainly do, and as I say in boxing, you're only as good as your last fight, and it was on the back of a defeat. Just like to point out that I sent Andy Purwell to both the Ramirez fight and this past weekend. So Josh, no problems with me. But anyway, let's hear from a man who was a very interested and keen observer this weekend, as he has been for the last 50 years in this sport. Mr. Bob Arum, the Bob father himself, had this to say after Taylor Lopez this weekend.
Teo was much too fast for him, and his speed was what made the difference.
Was you surprised by just how good Teofimo looked in there tonight? Was you surprised at all?
Surprised about what?
By how good Teofimo looked?
No, I mean, Derek here was in the training camp with him, so we knew you would be the best Teofimo out there. So we're not surprised.
People questioned if Teofimo was kind of past it, if he could return back to the form we saw when he beat Lomachenko. Is he now for you the number one at 140?
Oh yeah, definitely. He beat the number one at 140. He's the number one.
We had Bill Haney here. Obviously, Devin Haney's deciding what he wants to do with his future. Is it likely we could make a Haney-Lopez fight?
That's for tomorrow. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
So that was the one and only Bob Arum. I start to grow quite fond of his interviews with Andy. You've got somebody in Andy who's still very earnest and green, and somebody in Bob who doesn't really want to talk to anybody anymore, I don't think. And fair play to him. I'm sure I'd be the same way after his time in the sport. But Andy, going to come to you. He said there that Teofimo Lopez now unquestionably the number one in the division after the win over Josh Taylor. It's a very, very attractive division with all of those lightweights moving up. Devin Haney, of course, we feel like he's going to be on his way up, the still undisputed lightweight champion. You've got Ryan Garcia. There's, of course, Regis Prograis, who's boxing this weekend. It's a hot time in a hot division.
Yeah, it really is. And you just feel like there's been some brilliant momentum built in that division over the last few weeks with Healy, Lomachenko and Davis Garcia. And if they could keep that rolling on, around lightweight, super lightweight, if they could keep that rolling on, that would be superb. And if they can make that fight between Healy and Lopez, I think that's probably the best one for keeping that ball moving in the right direction, because they've got an opportunity, all of those fighters. And we first started talking about it when Lopez beat Lomachenko, and then just nothing happened for a really long time. But they've got the opportunity between them, and there's quite a few of them, to really just grab the sport by the scruff of the neck and give us some brilliant fights, fights that we all want to see, and at the right time as well. Because what we liked about Davis Garcia was, he's not super young, Gervonta Davis, but we liked the fact that it seemed to be happening at the right time, at the kind of time that things used to happen at when you hark back to the era of the Four Kings and things like that. And you just get the feeling, the kind of characters that they are, that they'll all be up for it, that this is what they want. They want that kind of round robin that's going to really mark them down as being special fighters and fighting in an era where people will look back on it and just think, like we do now, because this will happen in 20, 30 years' time. People will look back on what's happening now and think, those were the days. We don't think it now, but it will. That's just what happens. Yeah. And I think they all love the idea of that, of people looking back in years to come, or when they're at boxing shows, when they're in their 50s, people just having that reverence for them, because these were the guys who made it happen and really did it for the sport and took the fights and rolled the dice and gave it to us. I think they're up for it.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of a similar fight Spence Crawford is announced for the end of July, but that's, a fight that could have happened a couple of years ago. Still a great fight and still two top guys, but it's a fight that, maybe would have been great to have even 4 or 5 years ago, depending on what your timeline looks like. Chris, going to come to you. There was mentions there about Devin Haney versus Teofimo Lopez. Andy just mentioned it being kind of the fight to continue the hype and the interest at super lightweight. How do you like that one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Haney's looking like he's going to move up, so I think it's a really good fight. Obviously, then it's almost like, well, who was the best at lightweight, because they both, became undisputed and both beat Loma. I say that through, gritted teeth, because I think Loma beat Haney. But I think it's a great fight. I think there's some, like we spoke about, there is so many good fights in that division. I think Prograis, because of what's been going on with him over the last few, since the Taylor fight, is sort of getting forgotten about and sort of been the forgotten man in that division, because that fight with Taylor was so close. Like, we were there, and I thought Taylor edged it, but I was biased at the time. He was in the gym with me, so it's hard to really know. But it's such a good fight, and Prograis is such a good fighter. He's attritional. He's powerful, puts his shots together. Quite short at the weight, but he's thick set. Can punch the body, head. And yeah, it's an interesting division. Even him against Lopez is a great fight. But yeah, I think Haney against Lopez, with how big the names are, as well as what they both achieved at lightweight, is a fantastic fight.
And there's still a certain Ryan Garcia knocking about as well, making his return at £140. I saw we mentioned all of the Four Kings or whatever we were calling them, the Four Princes at the time. Have kind of had their little, everyone used Lopez as the example. He was one of the Four Kings. He got beat by Campos, and he's back now. And it's arguably more intriguing now, really, because initially when they came through at lightweight, it was all very fresh, and we kind of didn't really know what was going on. Now it's like Garcia's moving up, and he got beat by Davis, but there was the rehydration clause, and this kind of boxing, as we all know, has this wonderful way of keeping you interested and keeping you having new things to discuss as the wheel keeps spinning. Here's an idea. Josh Taylor stays at £140. Josh Taylor versus Devin Haney. That do anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, it does. Absolutely it does. I'd love to see that.
It's going to be interesting to see where Haney goes, isn't it? Because he's out of contract now. It's going to be interesting to see where he hangs his hat. You'd think £140, really, Top Rank they are very well stocked there. They've got Zepeda, they've got Ramirez, who was ringside at this past weekend calling out the winner. They've obviously got Teofimo Lopez now played it quite well, as they often do, top rank. You know, they often find themselves in quite strong positions, and it's quite difficult to get them away from them. But £140 just got a few nice little bits bubbling along now.
Yeah, it has, and there's all sorts of good fights that you could make. I'm a big fan of Prograis. I've always really enjoyed watching him. I remember going down to the Peacock when they were there for about a month in preparation for the fight against Josh Taylor, and he did a really good job of selling that fight. You know, it was open house. You could pretty much go down there whenever you wanted. It's near where I live. He's good fun, you know. He's a good guy. He went into cold storage a bit. People didn't really want to fight him. He had difficulties getting fights, but he's back on the scene now, and he's really good to watch. Really good to watch. And there's plenty of them. There's plenty of them knocking around. I think they've got to be a bit careful with Ryan Garcia, because he hasn't. I think he could go on and achieve great things, but he hasn't done it yet. And if you were to throw him straight into a fight with someone like Teofimo Lopez, I don't think that would be a very good idea.
Yeah, you'd make Lopez a sizable favourite.
I don't think that would be a very good idea, because that was a hard night against Gervonta Davis. He was exceptional, but at the same time, as we went into on the show, I understand why he didn't get up from the body shot. I think I do. I think I can empathise with that. But ultimately, he didn't get up, and he could have. So they've got to be careful with him.
Comes down to that mindset thing again, doesn't it? Like, you've got to really want it in this sport, and as soon as you don't really want it, little 5% get taken off in training, and then fight night comes, and if you don't want to get up, like, if you can't get up, fair enough, but he did get up as soon as 10 was said, and he was, you know, congratulating, and it's a bit like, well, he's just proud to be there, and it's hard to see that as a fighter, but you know, he's also achieved more than I have in my career. You know, he's had a fantastic career, earned plenty of money and stuff, so it's, who am I to judge him? So yeah, I think Garcia now, funnily enough, as highly as I used to rate him, is probably the names we've just chucked in, probably the bottom of that list of the top guys at 140.
Certainly one to get the intrigue and the interest because of, you know, the massive following that he brings, and you know, you kind of see the highlight reels of Ryan Garcia, and it maybe plays a slightly different image than what we see on the night. You mentioned there about you rating him really well. Of course, you were over in Texas for him against Luke Campbell, who messaged me actually. He messaged me last night. Luke Campbell said, "Rob, I told you." Because he thinks in his head, which he didn't, that he told me that Teofimo Lopez would beat Josh Taylor.
It's good to see him around.
He's great to be around, isn't he?
Yeah, he's good to see him down there. He's good fun, isn't he? Yeah, he looked great. I thought he looked really well. I did hear him give a couple of interviews where he said that he's sort of found it hard since retiring. Yeah. You know, and I think everybody does. And you know, the first couple of years are always reckoned to be the hardest.
He was talking about 3 months ago. It was I told my wife, and I was like, what? I heard a while ago that he was talking about coming back, but he said that he had about 3 months ago he had the itch to get back in there, which I think, you know, obviously it's completely up to him what he does, but you wouldn't want to see him come back and, you know, lose a fight beneath his level. Obviously wasn't able to get that world title that some others have had, but an Olympic gold medalist, made some good money, was in some great fights and fought some brilliant fighters. Yeah,
you know, it's you need a bit of luck sometimes. I'm not talking outrageous slices of luck. You just probably don't need to go and fight Linares in Los Angeles and then Lomachenko as your 2 world title fights. You know, that's about as hard as it gets. And that fight against Linares, who was right up there at the time.
Yeah, it was like top 3 pound for pound.
Very close. Was very close. You know, it's one of those ones where you could argue, a bit like Taylor Prograis, if that had been in the USA, I probably would have thought Prograis would have got it. If Luke had been boxing Linares in the UK, maybe he would have got it. It was that close, and then Lomachenko, you know, say no more. You need the rub of the green, or rather, you don't need that. You know, and that's just, for some people, that's how it is, and that's how it was for him. And I can totally understand why you would look at it and just think, well, maybe things might be a bit different if I come back now. There might be a few more opportunities, and and all the rest of it. But it's just the way it was for you is the way it was for you, and there's not really anything you can do about it.
Well, he was out in Las Vegas, and he watched Rolly Romero versus Ismael Barroso, and I said to him, and he said he saw Rolly winning the world title and thought, I could beat him.
I know, and that's the problem, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
You know, you look at like Macklin, who I know well, obviously. Felix Sturm, where he did win that fight, and then Sergio Martinez, who was right at the top of his game, and then Gennady Golovkin.
Yeah.
But that's how it is for some people. Yeah. That's how it. But in other circumstances, things fall, and you get to fight. Your promoter spends the money, and you get to fight at home for a vacant title. Now that doesn't mean that the guy you're up against isn't a really good fighter. I mean, Froch had to fight Jean Pascal, for example, for his WBC title. I'm pretty sure that was vacant, who's rock hard, and that was a great fight.
Unbelievable fight that is.
Brilliant fight. But he just it's not the same for everybody, basically, is the point that I'm sort of labouring to make, and that's why not all world titles are created equal. I mean, you won yours against a sort of long reigning champion who was reckoned to be either him or Breedis, the number one, and that's great, and there's a lot of pride to be taken from that. But I can understand the frustration. I mean, it would be enormously frustrating. But the unfortunate truth for elite level athletes is that there's still quite a lot of luck involved.
There is, and like you look at what happened with Campbell and Loma, and then Haney getting given the belt and then defending against Abdullayev as his first defence, but it was actually he'd been given the belt. It would have been for the belt essentially, and Campbell was meant to fight Abdullayev for the belt, and it's like he would have beaten.
He was supposed to fight Fortuna as well.
Yeah, Fortuna was going to happen, and it's just it was so frustrating to be around him at that time, because I've watched Luke win Olympic gold and remember like him being one of the British idols of and someone for amateurs to look up to. I think winning Olympic gold is harder than winning a world title. 100%. You get one shot every 4 years at your weight. You have to go through an impossible process almost to just get to a qualifier, to then get to a qualifier, then qualify, and then go through the tournament and win Olympic gold is just phenomenal. And hopefully he can, for me, I don't want to see him come back, and hopefully he can remember that. I remember having the conversation with him actually the night of the Garcia fight, back in his room, just me and him, and saying, look mate, yes you didn't win a world title, but that's all you didn't win. Like, you won everything else, you earned loads of money, you won Olympic gold. Like, yes, a world title, is the ultimate goal in professional boxing, but you're healthy, you got your health intact, you haven't been bashed about, you've got a great family, you've got plenty of money, you won Olympic gold. Like, it's harder to do that, but we're fighters and we want to win, so I also get that. I said to him in changing after fight, I said, after my fight, I said, how have I won a world title and you haven't? There's something wrong with this sport when that's happening, because he's just a phenomenal fighter, and it definitely feels weird to have him supporting me winning a world title when I should have been there when watching him win one. But like you said, that's the luck of the green in this sport.
Okay, well, moving on from our impromptu Luke Campbell segment of the podcast. They're always a pleasure to talk about Luke Campbell, but anyway, moving on, we're going to draw things to a close with just having a look at the 140-pound landscape. Andy, going to come to you first. I want to know your top 5 as it stands at super lightweight.
Well, you've got to go with Lopez at number 1. I think you've still got to put Taylor at number 2. We'll include Devin Haney as a 140-pounder. Oh, okay. I was just going to ask because given the anally retentive way that I go about rankings and things like that.
Oh yeah, I definitely should have briefed this in before.
So yeah, I think you've got to go Lopez number 1 and Taylor number 2. I don't see any other way you can do it. I would go with Prograis at 3. Maybe put Haney in at 4 in that case. And really sure about 5. No, you'll have to come back to me on that one.
Okay. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I want you to go first
me
because
to go
I'm
first.
very similar to Andy. To be
Okay,
honest.
so I'll go first. So number 1, Teofimo Lopez. Number 2, Regis Prograis.
Okay.
Number 3, Subriel Matias. Number 4, because he's not boxed at the weight yet. Well, actually, number 4, we'll go for Josh Taylor. And number 5, Devin Haney. That's why, because Devin Haney's not boxed at the weight yet.
Yeah, I guess Matias has got to go in at 5, hasn't he?
I think Matias versus Teofimo Lopez is a
For me, I mean,
fantastic
Matias
fight.
has got to go in at 5. You know, if I'm thinking about who else I'm going to put in, then it has to be him, really, doesn't
I
it?
think he's a real handful for any of them at 140 pounds. I would really have liked to have seen him box Josh Taylor with a fit, fire, and at his best 140 pound Josh Taylor. I think that's a war. Matias versus Taylor. Don't see many people queuing up to fight him. Subriel Matias at 140 pounds.
Who's he with?
PBC. There was talks of him going to Matchroom. There was around the Regis Prograis time. There was a lot of rumours around him going to Matchroom. You could do Prograis versus Matias. I think there's lots of fun fights to make at 140 pounds. But that's my top 5. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you go Lopez number 1. Then I would have gone sort of split between Prograis and Taylor because the first fight was so close. And it's, I don't know, you haven't really seen Prograis maybe at his best since because he hasn't had to be. And then obviously Taylor in his last 2 fights, so I can't split them 2 really because it feels harsh to go against Taylor because he beat him, but at the same time times have changed. And then I'd probably go to they're my joint second, and then what would be 4th would probably be Haney. In terms of who's coming up, and then I haven't seen enough of Matias to properly. Who did he box last? I think I watched his last fight.
Jeremias Ponce.
Yeah, I think you.
I was toying with Catterall for number 5 because. Like people do have short memories. Everybody thinks that he beat Josh Taylor, and Josh Taylor was number 1 at the time. And I know that he's been inactive since Jack, and he just boxed again the other week. Yeah. But at the same time,
but he didn't beat the best version of Josh Taylor. I think that's why it's hard to put him in because we do know that wasn't the best version of Josh Taylor, and I think was that because he caused that. You have to give him a bit of credit there, but I think it's difficult to pick a number 5.
Rolly Romero,
and he wouldn't be in my top 5. I thought.
Hey, you see a situation where you see Rolly Romero. I think O'Hara Davis would beat him if they fought next. You see Josh Taylor versus O'Hara Davis too
for a world title.
For a world title, O'Hara Davis gives Josh Taylor a voluntary.
Imagine.
Yeah.
How strange is boxing?
Yeah, it's the weirdest sport. That was the first fight I had.
Bang up for that though.
Yeah,
I would be. I really would.
First fight I attended when I joined the McGuigan's
back
was
at the Brayhead Arena,
and I was like, I like this. This is fun. These fight weeks are great fun. Especially night that was. But Taylor beats him every day of the week for me if they have a rematch. But you'd have to pay O'Hara very well, I think, to get him to get in there with Taylor again.
That'd be interesting. You've got Ryan Garcia floating around as well, so it's exciting times at 140 pounds. I think Jose Ramirez has got visions of boxing the now retired Teofimo Lopez, of course.
I forgot about him as well.
Yeah, Teofimo Ramirez. Ramirez being in and around the conversation. There's so many people at 140. Gary Antoine Russell.
Yeah, probably stick Ramirez.
I just kind of felt like there must be an obvious choice for number 5, and it just wouldn't come to me. But Ramirez. I forgot about Ramirez.
There's a few good ones in
really
there. Just had a win over Richard Comey as well. Stop Richard Comey.
Yeah, really good fights to be made. They need another WBSS at 140.
Just needed another WBSS. They'll definitely do the cruiserweights again because it's just what they do.
I'm up for it.
But okay, that's all we've got time for here today on the Boxing Show. Thanks to everybody for enduring us for however long we've been going on for, and of course to our panel, the WBO Cruiserweight Champion of the World, Chris Billam-Smith, and Andy Clarke. Thanks very much, guys, for stopping by, and to you for watching us. Let us know in the comments who you think is the current number 1 at 140 pounds. But for me, Rob Tebbutt, from Chris Billam-Smith and Mr. Andy Clarke, thanks very much, and we'll catch up with you next time.